Hey, I want to welcome Thom Rainer with us today. Thom is, I guess just call you the head honcho at LifeWay. Is that your official role, Thom?
Close to it, something like that, or CEO, one of the two. But thanks for having me, Tony.
Well, it's good to have you with us today. And actually, we could talk about what you're doing at LifeWay, and there'd be a lot of fun conversation there. But my primary reason for wanting to connect with you today is because of your recent book. And look, I have it. Actually, it's right here. It's
Oh, that
called
is so cool. I have no idea. I've never seen that book before.
It's called Becoming a Welcoming Church. And Thom, I'm just grateful that you've actually put this resource together because our team at the Unstuck Group, we've worked with 300 churches now across the
Wow.
country. And part of what we do with every church we serve is we do a health assessment with the church, which includes a secret shopper experience. And needless to say, not every church we find is actually a welcoming church. And actually, where I want to begin is with this question for you. Is it possible that a church can be friendly but not be welcoming?
It's not only possible, it's probable. The reality is that a lot of guests will come and their perspective will be, oh, those people are friendly to each other. We don't
Mhm.
notice our holy huddles. We don't notice our fellowship patterns. We don't notice as much that we go directly to the people with whom we're most comfortable as opposed to going to those that we do not know. I can just tell you yesterday, I'm on the welcoming team at my church. One of the things I love about being at my church, number one, my son is my pastor. Number two, for all practical purposes, I don't accept any engagements on the weekend anymore, just so I can be a churchman. And I have a couple of roles. I'm responsible for taking out trash first thing in the morning because it's a church plant and there's no one there during the week. And then secondly, I'm on the welcoming team. And I noticed that one of our best guys on the welcoming team let about 3 or 4 new faces, families, walk right past him.
Ooh.
And he was talking to people that he knew. Now, I'm not going to throw him under the bus because I've done that too. Well, I guess I did just throw him under the bus. But
We
the,
don't know his name, though.
you don't know his
Preserve the
name. You don't know
confidentiality.
which one it was. As a matter of fact, my son, the pastor, came out and said, "We just had a couple of new families walk right past y'all. Can we get them some gift bags?" And he went and got them himself. My son, the pastor, did. So I think my son was chastising me, but I I saw it from a distance. It's not my fault, Jess. It's somebody else's fault. But that's the reality, Tony. If I'm in a room, now I'm an introvert, so I'm going to be different than most people. But most people, if they're in a room, their natural tendency is to go to the people they know and with whom they're comfortable. Guess who that does not include? That does not include guests, especially first-time guests. So for most of us, with few exceptions, we can be very friendly, but we are not friendly necessarily to those who are walking into the church. It's
Mhm.
common, too common.
Yeah. So, and actually, I have personal experiences. One church I visited, between every service, and they had multiple services over the weekend, between every service, I just grabbed a cup of coffee. So it was pretty jittery by the end of the weekend. But I grabbed a cup of coffee and I just stood in their lobby space, and
Yeah.
not one person came up to me throughout the entire weekend. And so it's exactly what you're describing, Thom. And again, I don't think anybody's doing it intentionally to be
No.
mean-spirited or not to be welcoming and friendly to guests. But, we develop relationships with people and we tend to gravitate to those people. And I think what you're speaking to is an intentionality that's required to be mindful of the guests that are showing up for the first time.
You got it.
So, beyond this challenge of understanding that we have to be intentional and actually introducing ourselves and engaging with guests, what are some other common barriers that you see in churches that are preventing them from being a welcoming church?
There are a lot of them, Tony. Let's go through the path of maybe a guest I'll be quick with because I know the Unstuck group does this in great detail and y'all do a great job with it. But we start off with the website. If the
Hmm.
first place that someone is going to go most of the time when they are looking at a church is to the website, does the website above the fold, and I realize we're talking digital, not print, but on the immediate home screen, does the website have the time of the services and the physical location to put into a GPS? There are other things like, can you pre-race your kids, and there are a lot of other things. But all right, the first step is your website a welcoming type of church? Second thing is when they come on campus, is the signage adequate? I have been to more one church, and I know that you have, and I know the Unstuck group has, where you're not sure where the entrance is. You wouldn't know where the entrance was unless you were watching where people were going, because it's not the obvious entrance. So is there signage, external signage, parking signage? Once they get in, is there signage to tell them where to take their kids if they have kids that have to go into some type of child care or preschool or children's area? So all of those are obstacles that can be overcome immediately. I mean, immediately. We've already talked about the greeters, or as we call them, our welcome team at our church. Are they trained adequately? Can they do what they need to do? And one of the reasons I wrote this book, among others, is to be able to give to leaders in a church, becoming a welcoming church, on how to train greeters. And our greeters are some of the friendliest people I know, but some of the principles they did not know. So those are just a few of the many issues that can confront us that are easily overcomable obstacles.
Yeah, we don't think about the website, but I just read in recent weeks, now this has to do with marketplace, but 88% of people before they make a purchase research it online. And yes. I have to think that the percentage is probably as high for people that are considering visiting a church for the first time.
Exactly.
The case, yeah.
Exactly.
All right. So here's the challenge, Thom. It's kind of like when we live in our home all the time, we don't notice the things that may not make our homes welcoming because we're in it all the time. What do you recommend for churches to determine whether or not they're really a welcoming church?
Call you.
So beyond that,
call the Unstuck group. I mean, who you going to call? The Unstuck group. Go do an on-site consultation. Let that be part of your consultation. Y'all are the best at it. Beyond that, you have the secret shopper or the mystery guest or the secret guest. I did provide a very simple tool in the book, not as comprehensive as the one that y'all do, but it's still in there. Tony, when I was a pastor, let's go back to right before the automobile was invented. When I was a pastor, and 4 different churches, in 2 of those churches, the 2 last churches that I served, I would actually pay an unchurched person to come to our church every 6 months, a different person. 2 things happened. He or she was able to tell me and our leadership team what they experienced. That was many years ago, and it was just eye-opening for us. Secondly, it gave me gospel conversation opportunities. It became one of a simple and not quantitatively high, but a simple way of doing outreach and sharing the gospel with people. So what can you do is you can simply ask someone to come to your church and give you feedback, honest feedback on what they experienced. And I said unchurched person, I want to clarify that. 1 6-month period, I'd have someone who was not in church or purely unchurched person. Then I'd have someone who was churched but had never been to our church. And I wanted to know what they saw from the perspective of someone who sees churches on a regular basis. So every year I was getting 2 different perspectives, unchurched and church, but both of those guests had never been to our church before. That is one of the simplest, and it can be one of the most painful things to go through. It's kind of like my annual physical exam, Tony, and where the doctor says, well, step on the scale. I say, I don't want to step on the scale. I don't want to see that number. But that's the reality. Sometimes we need to look in the mirror. Sometimes to add to the metaphor, we need to open our eyes to things we don't see.
Yeah, and let me just add to that. When you do that, make sure you're also getting a representation of younger generations in that process too. It's amazing, but my 20-somethings have a completely different perspective of church experience.
Oh, that's good.
Growing up. So let's invite them into the process as well. But I love that advice. It's relatively cheap to pay somebody to come in and experience what's happening in the church and giving their unfettered perspective of what's happening in your ministry. All right. So here's what I believe, Thom. I mean, I love the opportunity we have at the Unstuck group. We're working with all different size churches under 200, churches over 20,000. There are definitely some instances where larger churches, I think, have an advantage over smaller churches because of the resources that are required. But
Sure.
in this instance, my gut tells me that smaller churches actually have an advantage when it comes to creating a welcoming experience. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that because I'm in one of them.
Yeah.
Two-year-old church averaging about 150 in worship attendance. Here's what I know. Because I'm there almost every Sunday, I can tell you who the regulars are, and I can tell you who is brand new. For the most part, someone that I've never seen before. So can most of the others who are part of the regular attendees of the church at Spring Hill. And so one of the immediate advantages is we know who are the first or second time guests without even having them fill out the card even before they get there. So that is one of the advantages. Another advantage that I think small churches have is we can't depend upon others to do it. So there's not this huge welcoming team. Sure, we have a few people, but we know that all of us have to be welcoming because there are relatively few of us. And so the advantage is most of us are thinking with intentionality that we have to connect with these people who are coming to our church. And then another advantage is a large church may have 20, 30, 40 new families in 1 week, depending upon the size. We have 3 or 4 new families. We're able to connect with them with a level of intensity that I hope is not violating their space, but we are able to connect with them. One of my ministries at the church, Tony, that I exercise probably once or twice a month is I actually ask those first-time families to go to lunch with me. And the relationship begins to connect a little bit more. Of course, it has to be appropriate. If my wife is not with me, I'm not going to ask a female. That would be obvious. If we're together, we can ask anyone. But once or twice a month, I'm taking someone out to eat. And I want to tell you, the sticky factor is huge, just because I'm able to recognize them and because they're relatively few guests compared to the big church. Those things are really, really cool for the smaller church.
That's good. So before I get to my final question here, you kind of alluded to it. Is it possible for church to be over-welcoming?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're talking to the king dude of introverts. I mean, if someone gets in my face and starts asking me what I would perceive to be are intrusive questions, and Tony, I got to have my space. I mean, just don't get too close to my face. So yeah, those you can overwhelm someone. You can overwhelm someone with everybody honoring space, but then everybody going to that person, 3 or 4 of them. I mean, you've seen churches where, oh my gosh, we have first-time guests here. Everybody attack, go. And so you have 5 or 6 families going up to this one family, and they're just absolutely overwhelmed. So yeah, use discretion. Use common sense. Put yourself in their shoes and ask how comfortable you would or would not be.
You and I might be wired similarly. I did a personality profile several years ago, and it specifically said, stay outside of 2 feet of Tony's personal space.
Does it have a measurement where I can be 3 or 4 feet? Exactly.
All right. So here's the final question I have for you then. Let's assume the church goes through some process and indeed confirms today we're not welcoming. What are some of the first steps that the church can take to move forward from there?
If you're not welcoming, you need to be trained on how to be welcoming. So basic training, again, without too much self-promotion. That's one of the things I do with the book. And that's what a number of churches have done with the book. They actually use that as a training manual. Then once you begin to hear back why you are not welcoming, most of the things are easily remedied. Signage is not expensive anymore. Our welcome center is a table with a cloth on it. It is probably donated, or either we got it from the junk pile somewhere. So the types of things that you can do that will make a significant difference, training people, whether they're in the parking lot or in the foyer, and by the way, Tony, we actually have worship service greeters. No, they're not the people who are at the door. They're people in the worship center, because here's one thing that we have found. The time that people feel most awkward guests is after they sit down in the worship center. and no one talks to them or sits near them. We have 2 people in our little church who are assigned to be on the lookout and not only to engage them conversationally ourselves, but to introduce them to others to sit by them. So again, that has become a real sticky factor. Of course, I got that language from you, so I'm really borrowing all that information from the Unstuck group. But that has become a real sticky factor for us. The bottom line is it doesn't take a lot of money, and it usually doesn't take a lot of time. It can be very basic to become a welcoming church.
Yeah, that's very good. So I saw some research a number of years ago. The number one reason people show up to church for the very first time is because a friend invites them. But the number one reason people stay at a church, I would have thought would have been the preaching or the worship or things like that. But the research, and I can't remember, it might have been Charles Arnn that did the research, Tom. But the number one factor he found for people actually returning was the church was welcoming.
I can believe it.
And so you might not think of this as a theologically weighty point of having a healthy church, but that's one of the reasons why at the Unstuck group we take it so seriously is it's the coming back factor. We want people to come back and hear the gospel and take steps of faith, and being a welcoming church is pretty essential to that. So again, Tom's new book, it's called Becoming a Welcoming Church, and it's a small resource. I won't say how much it is, but it's relatively cheap. I would have charged more, Tom. And the reason
actually, my little plug for this is if you order it is in bulks of 20, it's $5 each.
There you go. And that's what I was going to offer is this, you mentioned training resource for your whole guest services team. This would be a great resource to put in their hands and help with that training. So Tom, thanks for putting together the resource and thanks for joining us today.
Great to be with you, Tony. Thanks for letting me come again.